Hey everybody, how's it going? My name's Paul. I started the DiceyReview.com, and today we're going to be going over the 2 to 4 player game Via Nebula by Martin Wallace. This is a game that was released by Space Cowboys. It's a lot of fun. It's basically a route building resource management game. But let's talk about how to set the game up, and then we'll go through the different aspects of the play experience. Alright, so the first thing that you're going to want to do is set up the board like you see it out in the middle of the table. This is the beginner side of the board. There's a side with kind of more difficulty for more experienced players. You'll also want to take a player mat for each player. There's 4 different colors: blue, white, brown, and black. And you'll want to put it on the side that's right for the number of players that you're playing. I'm doing the 2-player side, so you can see there's a little 2 right there. There's also a side over here for 3 and 4 players. So you'll go ahead and take that 2-player side and then place it out like so. Alright, so the next thing you'll want to do is you'll want to prepare all of the little resource tiles. So the first thing you want to do, there are 5 of these resource tiles that show this number 5 right here. These are kind of special tiles that will start the game out with some available resources. What you want to do is randomly shuffle these and get rid of 1 and put it back into the box. So we've gotten rid of 1 and put that back in the box. You'll then want to take these special tiles, shuffle them together with these regular tiles, and then place them face up on each one of these green meadow spaces out on the board. Alright, so as you can see, we've placed all of those tiles out on the board on the different open meadow spaces. The next thing that we want to do is we want to find all of these special tiles that have the 5 on there, and we want to take those tiles off the board, put them back in the box, and replace them with the goods that they show. Now each one of these tiles has a 5 on them, but just in general in a 2-player game, 1 less resource than what's printed on these tiles is put out. So for each of these spaces, you're going to want to remove it from the board and put out 4 of that type of resource. So for this spot, we would put out 4 bricks. For this spot, we would put out 4 wood. For this spot over here, we would put out 4 stone. And then it looks like for this spot right up there, we would put out 4 of the little pig meeples. Alright, now you can see that we've gotten the resources placed out on the board like they're printed on those tokens. And we also want to just place some of the general resources that are in the box out next to the board as a general supply. So you can see over there we've placed out some stone, some wood, some bricks, a few of the pigs, and some of the food. Alright, so the next thing we're going to want to do is place out the cards how we're supposed to. The very first thing you want to do is place this card up in the spot that's marked with the same picture. This is the end of the game card. Whoever triggers the end of the game gets that bonus card worth 2 points. The next thing you're going to want to do is shuffle up these private contracts and deal out 2 to each player. So for this case, we would hand out these 2, and then the rest of them would go back into the box. The rest of these general contracts, you would go ahead and shuffle those up and then place them on the spot designated on the board, and then you would deal out the top 4 for the general display for all of the players to be able to see. So the board is pretty much set up. Now all we need to do is set up our player boards. What we're going to want to do for that is we're going to want to take all of the different meeples for our player color, which will be these buildings and these workers, as well as these little tiles that will show we're building something, and place them on our player mat. So we'll place those there, we'll place all of our buildings right here, and then we'll place our workers in the spaces right there. Alright, so that's done. The next thing we want to do is put a stack of unexplored meadow tiles in each one of these 4 hexagonal spaces up at the top. So we'll take our stack of 5 meadow tiles and place 1 in each of these spaces until we have 25 total. Alright, so the very last thing that you want to do is take all of the remaining meadow tiles and place them in a stack somewhere next to the board as a general supply. And that's pretty much it. After that, you'll want to determine a start player and then get to playing the game. Alright, so now that we've talked about setting up the game board, we want to talk about how to actually play the game. Each player on their turn is going to receive 2 actions that they can do. Now you can take one of 6 different actions. So as you can see on your player board, there's little visual reminders to help you remember each one of the different actions you can take. But just in general, on your turn, you're going to be able to take 2 actions, and after that it's going to pass to the player to your left. So let's look at the different actions, how you will take them and what they'll do. Okay, so the first thing that you'll be able to do is place a craftsman. So in a 2-player game, each player is going to receive 3 of these little craftsmen. It's important to note that if you don't have an available craftsman, meaning all of your craftsmen are already on the board, then you can't take this action. But if you have craftsmen on your player mat and you're ready to place them somewhere, you can take this action. So what you're going to do whenever you place a craftsman down is you're going to pick any space that shows an available resource token like this and place your worker on that space. And this is called opening an exploitation, is what the game calls it. But basically what's going to happen is, let's say I wanted to go right here. You would put your worker right there. You'd take this tile, put it face down next to the player board, and then you would put out as many resources as it shows. Now just remember, in a 2-player game, you're going to put 1 less. So we would put out 3 stones on that space. So that is what happens whenever you place a craftsman. And that was just 1 action. That only takes 1 of your 2 available actions. But that's the first action that you can take, is placing a craftsman. One quick note about these craftsmen and these tiles: whenever you take these resource tiles, you get the points at the end of the game listed on the bottom. So there is an advantage to taking these tiles and opening up these exploitations. It's going to unlock resources that you can use on the board, and then at the end of the game, it's going to score you however many points are listed on the tile. Alright, the next thing that you can do on your turn is you can place a building site. Now, each player is going to have 3 of these tiles on their player board. In a 3- and 4-player game, this is going to be a half tile, because you can place, each person can put 2 of these building sites on the ruins in a 3- or 4-player game. In a 2-player game, these tiles are going to take up the whole space. So what you can do is you can find any of these ruin spaces out on the board, and these are the spaces that show these little ruins on them that have these that chasms in there. And you're going to place one of your building sites on one of those spaces. And what that means is that you are locking that space down to try and build one of your buildings. That's all there is to that action, though. That is also one of your 2 available actions on your turn. One other quick note about this action is that, once again, if you don't have one of these tiles available on your board, meaning you've placed all of your tiles out there, you can't take this action. You have to have these tiles on your player board to be able to take the action. Alright, the next action that we can take is exploring a fog space. So what we're going to do on this action is we're going to start taking the tiles off of our player board to cover up these different fog spaces on the board. Now there's an important order to doing this. You're going to want to take any tiles top down from the leftmost space on your board. So what we would do is we would start taking these tiles from this stack until this stack is empty, and then we would start taking tiles from this stack until this stack is empty, and so on. Because what's going to happen is, the more of these tiles that you place, if you clear one of these stacks at the end of the game, that's going to give you 2 points. So it pays off to explore as many spaces as you can. So for 1 action, you can take one of these tiles from your stack right here, and you can place it on one of the fog spaces on the board. Now there's a couple of placement rules to this. Basically, whenever you take one of these whenever you cover one of these fog spaces, you have to place this tile next to one of your player pieces, next to one of your building sites, or next to an explored empty meadow space. Meaning, like, if I put one of these meadow spaces right here, I could then place a meadow space right here, and then I could place a meadow space right there, and so on. Basically, if there's a space right here that has no building on it, no resources, anything like that, you can build next to it. So, like I said, in the future you could build one right here, and then if I wanted to, I could place another meadow tile right there, even though it's not next to any of my player pieces, but it is next to a completely empty meadow space right there. So that is placing a meadow tile. That is, once again, one of your 2 available actions. Alright, the next thing that we can do is we could explore a petrified forest. Now if you look at the board, you're going to see all of these little spaces out here that show trees coming up out of the fog. These are petrified forests, and they're a little bit harder to explore. They cost 2 actions to explore those spaces. So basically on the start of your turn, if you have 2 available actions, you could take one of your meadow tiles and place it onto a petrified forest to explore that space, but that is going to use both of your actions for the turn. So doing that will take up your entire turn. But other than that, there's no difference in that and exploring a regular fog space. All of the placement rules still apply. If it's next to an empty meadow tile, you're good to go. If it's next to one of your player pieces, you're good to go. So the same placement rules apply, but it's going to take 2 actions instead of 1. Alright, so the next thing that you can do is you can transport a resource to a building site. Now, this is one of the more interesting parts of the game. Just in general, you're going to see all of these contracts out on the board. You can see 4 that are laid out up there that everyone has access to, and then you're also going to have these 2 private contracts that were dealt out to you at the start of the game. Now, you're going to see a couple of things on these contract cards. You're going to see a point value, meaning this is how many points will be awarded to you if you've completed these contracts at the end of the game. You're going to see some special text on the very bottom. That takes effect whenever you complete the building. So for instance, this one right here says, whenever you complete this building, you get to place a resource from the reserve on one of my building sites. So basically, if I have this building, if I complete this contract, I'll be able to get a head start on completing another contract. The other thing that you're going to see is these requirements up at the top. So basically what this means is you're going to have these resources on one of your building sites to complete these contracts. So whenever you are transporting a resource to one of your building sites, you're wanting to transport the resources that you need to complete these contracts. So let's say that I am going to go for this contract. What I need to do is I need to transport a wood, a stone, and a pig to one of my building sites to be able to build this building. So when we're looking at the board, we can see that we are next to quite a bit of stone with one of my building sites. So let's say that for an action, I want to transport a stone resource to my building site. What you do is you have to look at your building site and the resources that you want. And there has to be a path in between that building site that's completely open, meaning that there are open meadow tiles between the resource that I want and my building site. If I wanted to transport these bricks down here to my building site, I couldn't do that because there are fog spaces in between the building site and the resources that I want. But if we look at these stone down here, we can see that there are open meadow tiles in between the resource that I want and my building site. So what you could do is for one action, you could take one of these stone and move it to that spot, because there is a uninhibited open path in between these resources and that building site. Alright, now let's just say that this path had been created out on the board. I had taken the time to place all of these meadow tiles down on these fog spaces. What I could do is on my next turn, I could use both of my actions to transport this pig and this wood to my building site, because there is a clear, uninhibited path of meadow tiles in between my building site and the resources that I need. So for one action, I could take this pig meeple and it could travel this path all the way down to the building site, and I could do that for one action. For my second action, I could take one of these available wood resources, transport it all the way down, and place it on my building site for one action as well. Now, in the example that I just gave, that would take up my turn, but then on the next turn, I could build one of my buildings. Alright, so the next action that we can take is we can construct one of our buildings. So as you can see, the building space that we have been delivering resources to now has a wood, a stone, and a pig meeple right there. And as you remember, one of the contracts that I have has a wood, a stone, and a pig up at the top as the required resources. So for one action, what I could do is I could turn in these resources, put them back in the supply, remove my building tile, place it back on my player board, and then place one of my building meeples out there on the board, and that would be a constructed building. I can do that for one action. And then you would want to take note of any special text on the card. So as you can see on this card, this one says that whenever I complete this building, I can place a resource on one of my other building sites. Now in the example that I'm doing right now, I don't have another building site out, so this wouldn't take effect. But just in general, if you build this building and you had another building site available, you would get to put a resource that you need onto that building site. After that, you can just place this next to your player board, and that is going to score you points at the end of the game. Now, there are a couple of different things to talk about whenever building a building that I want to go over, just so you know some different situations that might come up. The first thing to note is that we built one of our private contracts, but if you want to, you can also build one of the available buildings from the top of the board. Now, as you can see up there, there are 4 different buildings available, and they'll all have special text similar to the private contract that we built. You know, some may let you transfer resources, some may let you explore an extra meadow tile for free, something like that, a fog space. So basically, if you want to, instead of building one of the private buildings that you have, you can spend resources on your building site to build one of the 4 available common contracts, and as soon as you build one of those contracts, you would just replace it with one from the stack over to the right. The other thing to note about building a building is that you can build a building or claim a contract with less resources than what's on your building site. So for instance, let's say that I wanted to build this contract from the common display that just shows a pig and a food. Now you'll see that on this building site I have a pig, a food, and a stone. I can still build this contract if I want to. I just take the pig and the food and I put them in the general supply. I build this building and then, you know, resolve any special text and put it next to my player board just like normal. But the resources that were left over on our building site go into this little space on our player board that shows all these -1s. Now, that is bad. We don't want these resources on our player board because at the end of the game, for each resource that's in this box, we get -1 points. One thing to note about exploitations is that your worker will be stuck on the spot that you unlock until all of these resources have been transported away from that space. Now, the good thing is everyone has access to any of the resources that you unlock. So you don't have to transport all of these resources away, but just know that if you have any of these resources left at the end of the game, they go onto that little player spot on your player mat that gives you negative victory points for the resources there. So let's say, for instance, that this exploitation spot up here, the black player had transported 1 to their building site, but at the end of the game, I'm still left with this 1 stone here. I would have to take that stone and put it in the section of my player board that gives me negative points at the end of the game. So just in general, whenever you place these workers on the board, you're going to want to place them in a way that you feel like all of the resources will be taken by other players or yourself, so that you're not stuck with leftover resources on those spaces. You also don't want to have leftover resources on your building sites because, once again, any of those resources that are left over will go to this little spot on your player board that gives you -1 points. One final thing to note is that after the fifth and final building of any player is built, they get to take this end of the game card, and that is going to end their turn. After that, any other remaining players will have one final turn to do whatever they need to do to try and get more points. And then after you have taken your final turn, any resources left on any exploitation spots like this right here, and any building sites like that right there, once again will be placed on this storage area on your board, and then the final scoring will begin. So to calculate final scoring, what you're going to do is you're going to add any of the points that are printed on these spots right here. If you've managed to explore a bunch of fog spaces, these explorers will give you points right there. You're going to add up any of the points on these exploitation tokens that you have collected. Then you're going to add up any of the points on the cards that you have claimed. So for me, we would have claimed this Explorer end of the game card right here, and all of these different contracts right here. Then you're going to want to subtract 1 point for each of these resources in your storage area. After that, whoever has the most points wins. In the case of a tie, whoever has the least resources in the storage space will win the game. If there's still a tie, the victory is shared. Alright, so that's Via Nebula. It's really a pretty straightforward game to learn, but it's one of those games that provides a lot of replayability and a lot of depth. On the surface, it looks like a pretty straightforward game, and it is, but once you start playing it, you realize there are a lot of strategies to this game, a ton of fun interactions, and a lot of tense games that can be created, a lot of tense situations. So that's the game. If you have any questions, please send emails to thedicey@gmail.com. We hope that you've enjoyed the content, and until next time, we'll see you at the table.